With Season 4 on the horizon and literally every other good legacy character already introduced to Tekken 7, everyone is saying it's time for everyone's favorite ninja that apparently nobody and everybody at the same time plays to return to the Tekken main story once and for all. But just who is Kunimitsu, and what actually happened to her? Why is she not in the series today? Let's dig in and see what we can figure out. The events and important happenings for characters other than the Mishimas and Li Chaolan are somewhat muddy in the earlier Tekken games. The endings follow the old school fighting game philosophy where just because you beat the game with a character does not mean that the ending you see is just showing what would have happened had they won the tournament. Sometimes these endings are important storyline snippets showing something about the character's story arc, a silly vignette about their personality, or maybe even it is a non-canon here's what happened had they won kind of thing. Early Tekken games swap between all three of these freely, and it's really up to the player to read BIOS and story material for the next game to figure out what actually happened. And then sometimes none of it is true. For example, in the case of Heihachi, who was playable in Tekken 5, but didn't canonically participate in the King of Iron Fist Tournament 5 due to being under a pile of rubble. Now, I classify most Tekken 1 through 3 story information into 3 categories. The first category is confirmed information. This is information that's either in the game or it's in, for example, a BIOS in a manual or something like that, or Namco has said it themselves, and that includes Harada and Michael Murray if they're on Twitter talking about story. The second thing is probably true but potentially dubious. And this is specifically talking about the BIOS for characters in Tekken 1 through 3 that are unlockable, or boss characters. Most of those characters do not have BIOS in the in the manual. But if you go online and you look, you will find BIOS for those characters, and it's pretty much the same across the internet. So my guess is that Namco released those somewhere at some point, maybe in some certain edition of the game or on an old website or something like that, and they proliferated online. That's a tough word to say. They kind of spread out online, but it's also possible that someone just wrote them, and so everybody took that as true. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why I think some of that may have just been fabrication moving forward. But anyway, and the third is just straight up internet legend. So there is a document, it's an FAQ, a very old FAQ called Historicum Tekkenus, written by a guy named P.S. Artane. This thing is super old. I think it may have come out in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's basically just a giant conglomeration of all available story content for Tekken. So, God bless him for making it. However, and he says this in the opening, that there were several places in there where the story was just too ambiguous for it to really make sense. And so this person, he or she, went and decided, okay, I'm going to give my best guess as to what probably happened between these two characters, and I'm going to write it in the document. And so a lot of this stuff through the years has kind of leaked into the Tekken fandom, and they're just kind of things that everybody accepts about characters. That come from that document. Since we're just talking about Kunimitsu, I won't go too far into it, but if I presuppose or if I talk about something that we only really know about because that document guessed about it, I'll try to point that out. So let's try and start out with some concrete information. The Kunimitsu first appears as a sub-boss for Michelle Chang in Tekken 1. Now this is kind of a bit of an odd choice, at least at face value, considering how copy-pasted most of the sub-bosses were in fighting games back then. You would really think that Kunimitsu would be Yoshimitsu's boss, because for all intents and purposes in Tekken 1, they're essentially the same character. Now Tekken 1 is very slapdash as far as, the way it was put together. They didn't bother re-recording voice clips for most of the secondary characters and that kind of things. So Kunimitsu just copies Yoshimitsu's voice despite being a female. And she even shares his entire moveset in the console and the arcade version. Just try to remember that Kunimitsu didn't get her famous dagger that we all know her for using until her complete redesign in Tekken 2. So Kunimitsu doesn't really have an official BIOS anywhere. early on in the Tekken series because she's a sub-boss character, and because they wanted to keep those characters secret, they didn't put them in the manual. You don't get any example moves, screenshots, nothing. In fact, until Tekken 2 in the home version, when you had practice mode, that was really the first time you were able to look at their move list. Now given, most of them were just copies from other characters in Tekken 1. But anyway, let's look at, I'm putting this in category 2. So there are bios for all of those sub-boss characters floating around the internet, and they seem to be legitimate because they match kind of the writing style, and a lot of the stuff that they say, with a few exceptions, I'll talk about it, kind of fits the ethos of what is going on. And I've said this to my buddy Admiral McFish before, and he agreed that the early Tekken series, it really looks like to me that Namco, when they were planning out these characters, they had a story that was pretty well thought out and concrete in mind ahead of time. They just didn't do a good job in explaining it in the games, and that was probably because it was a fighting game in the 90s. They really didn't have the time or the technology to really convey a deep fighting game story in those days. But anyway, let's start out with Tekken 1. Remember, this is in Tier 2 as far as authenticity. I think it probably is, but there's a chance it's not. And if you know where this originally came from, and you could say, hey, Namco put this out at XYZ date, let me know in the comments. That'd be great. But anyway, here is Kunimitsu's bio for Tekken 1, and there's two versions of it. So the first one says, Kunimitsu is a former member of the Manji Party Thieves Guild. Kunimitsu was denounced from the group by its leader Yoshimitsu when she stole for her own personal interests, going against the Manji's principles. Even after her expulsion from the Manji Party, she pursued working as a thief, indulging her fancies. She's an irredeemable, I think that's supposed to be irredeemable, rogue. It would appear that she has her sights set on the Native American treasure that Heihachi has pillaged. Version 2 says, Kunimitsu was a member of the Manji crime syndicate, but when she stole for her own self-interest, she was expelled by the leader Yoshimitsu. Even after that, she continued to steal without reforming. Her reason for entering the tournament is to plunder the treasure that Heihachi Mishima stole from the Native Americans. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. Assuming that's true, it really lines up with why her sub-boss is Michelle. So let's read Michelle's bio from Tekken 1. And I'm reading this from my copy of the manual. This isn't on a wiki. This is official bios from the manual. It says, this wandering fighter is the daughter of a Native American woman and a Hong Kong man sent by Heihachi Mishima to find an ancient treasure on Native American land. Eventually, on her 18th birthday, she heard from her mother that her father had been killed by Heihachi's men. She's taking part in the tournament to take revenge on Mishima. Okay, so now this starts to make a little sense. Even though you would expect Yoshimitsu and Kunimitsu to be rivals in Tekken 1, they kind of just are former associates that happen to show up at the same place. And if you know where I'm going with this, that Native American treasure is actually semi-important to the early on lore of Tekken, and it happens to be Michelle's pendant. We know that it's her pendant because of the bio for Tekken 2 Michelle. So Tekken 1, Kunimitsu doesn't have an ending, which is a blessing and a curse because we don't learn anything more about her or her story, but at the same time we don't have anything to try to decide, okay, is this canon, is it not, what is it? So we do have the dubious, not really dubious, it probably did come from Namco thing floating around the internet here for Kunimitsu's Tekken 2 bio. And again, there's two versions of it. So the first one says that the sword that Yoshimitsu keeps, the katana, severs the life force of its enemies. It seems that a commandment among the Manji party dictates that the current leader of the group must kill the former leader with the sword when a change of leadership is at hand. No matter how many times Kunimitsu's grandfather, a swordsmith, tried to forge a sword as precious as the katana, the enchanted Yoshimitsu, he was unsuccessful. Believing her frail grandfather, this is written weird, I'm sorry. Believing her frail grandfather, Kunimitsu, should be written there, but it's not. Believing her frail grandfather, Kunimitsu, desires to make a high-quality katana before his death. Kunimitsu decides to join the tournament in order to seize Yoshimitsu's blade. Okay. Version 2 says, And this says that this come from a manual, but I have my Tekken 2 manual here, and Kunimitsu's not in it, so I don't know if there was a later release that did put the sub-boss characters in there. Maybe there is. That'd be cool. I'd love to see it. But anyway, it says Kunimitsu is known as the Devil Cat. She was a former member of the Manji Ninja Clan bandits led by Yoshimitsu. She lost her Japanese identity when she joined the group to maintain her anonymity. Upon joining, she was taught the skills of the stealth knife at the Manji clan of schools of Jujutsu. She stayed with the group for a few months until a series of petty thefts from the band's funds led to her dismissal. At a loose end, she decided to train as a mechanic mending air conditioners. And that's one of those things that makes me feel that's kind of dubious, because that just mending air conditioners, like what, like, I'm not saying that that a ninja can't learn to fix an air conditioner, but what about Kunimitsu's personality type makes you think she would learn to fix air conditioners for a living? It just doesn't really make any sense. So at this point, Kunimitsu has entered the first tournament to get Michelle's treasure. Obviously, she lost to Michelle because Michelle still has the pendant at the end of Tekken 2. She throws it in the river in the woods. Now Kunimitsu is basically out to steal Yoshimitsu's sword, which makes sense because in Tekken 2 she is Yoshimitsu's sub-boss, and her ending, even though it's non-canonical, shows her using Yoshimitsu's sword to cut something in half. And even later, years later, like 20 years later, in Tekken Tag 2, back when Namco actually made decent endings for its characters, we see her once again fighting with Yoshimitsu, and she steals the sword and replaces it with a bamboo stick and runs off. And Yoshimitsu says that, oh, your skills have greatly improved. And so this is pretty much it, canonical story-wise, for Kunimitsu. We know that she fought Yoshimitsu in Tekken 2, and that's really it. We don't really know the outcome of that fight because Yoshimitsu's ending and his story don't reference her at all. Yoshimitsu is basically out to rescue Dr. Boskanovich during the events of Tekken 2, and if you'll give me just a second, we'll look up Yoshimitsu's story in the manual. Yoshimitsu, the leader of the Manji group, the group of notorious thieves. The scientist named Boskanovich, who had once saved his life, has been abducted by Kazuya. Yoshimitsu will stop at nothing to rescue Boskanovich, so to do so he has entered the tournament. And that's it. Yoshimitsu and Kunimitsu's stories are very one-sided. They're not really, or I should say Yoshimitsu's is kind of one-sided. He's not really worried about Kunimitsu. I just kind of take it that he runs into her at the tournament and they fought, and I'm almost certain that Yoshimitsu wins. But this is kind of an end for the story of Kunimitsu. So we have to really kind of get into some conjecture from here on, and I'm going to tell you some conjecture and what I think and those sorts of things. So Kunimitsu does turn up again in Tekken Tag 1, and I feel it's only because Namco wanted to include everybody. Namco has never really been the biggest fan of Kunimitsu. Second is she turns up obviously in Tekken Tag Tournament 2, and then she was in the free-to-play game Tekken Revolution. I know very little about her appearance in that. I never got to play Tekken Revolution before it shut down, but she was in that. So what happened to Yoshimitsu? Before feigning ignorance in the comments, please make note that I meant to say Kunimitsu there, but I said Yoshimitsu because I'm a human and prone to mistakes. We now join our regularly scheduled broadcast. But we're going to talk about two things. The reason she's not in the game, and storyline-wise, what happened to Kunimitsu. We're going to talk about both of those. So, storyline-wise, is Kunimitsu dead? Did Yoshimitsu kill her? There's no way to say for sure. However, I don't think so, and I'll tell you why. One, Yoshimitsu does not really seem the killer type. I know there was that whole thing about the sword, and you have to use it to kill the prior clan leader when it's time to change. But that's kind of a special thing. That's like, okay, this guy's dying. It's time for the new owner to take up the sword. I'm going to ritually kill you with the blade to take over. So that seems fair to me. I mean, it's crazy because you're murdering somebody, yes, but it seems a far cry from making Yoshimitsu out to be a murderous individual. And so, like I said, none of Yoshimitsu's endings ever have anything to do with Kunimitsu. Only in Kunimitsu's endings do we ever see Yoshimitsu. So, if you go and watch Kunimitsu's ending in Tekken Tag 2, we see that Kunimitsu is still trying to steal the sword, and she does, and she runs off. And Yoshimitsu says, "Your skills have certainly improved," or something to that effect. You can go look up the actual ending. But while I don't believe, and it's certainly not, that this ending is canonical in any way, because Tekken Tag 2 is just kind of a what-if game, that doesn't mean it can't hold some merit as far as like characters' attitudes toward one another and kind of their past experiences, sort of things, because to arrive at this kind of fake situation, you have to have some sort of real situation to back it up. So you'll notice that Yoshimitsu does not express any shock to see that she's still alive, or that, you know, she's changed at all or whatever. He's more surprised about how better she's gotten, how much her skills have improved. Also in Tekken Tag 2, Kunimitsu's eyes are damaged. She wears a mask to cover only her eyes, and hackers have managed to take the mask off and look, and her eyes are closed. That's probably just because they didn't intend for her to be seen without her mask, but the red scars that she has also extend over both eyes. So it makes me think that what really happened was probably something to the effect of she fought Yoshimitsu in Tekken 2, lost badly, and perhaps he blinded her to stop her from stealing, or just as sort of a penance type thing. Whatever it was, Yoshimitsu definitely won that fight, and I think he won it pretty handily. And I think he scarred her on purpose, or something happened that caused her to be scarred. And then here in Tekken Tag 2, it's kind of a what-if situation. Yoshi sees her and is like, wow, she's really gotten better. Not, you're still alive? Or something like that. So I really believe that Yoshi is still alive. Harada likes to tiptoe around characters. He doesn't like to say, yes, a character's dead. Like, there's just no convincing me that's not supposed to be Jun Kazama's head in the introduction to Tekken 3. But to this day, if you ask Harada on Twitter, he'll say, no, that's not Jun Kazama's head. Jun is just missing. And I found a post on the internet, GameFAQs, and other places saying that, in the past, Harada tweeted that Kunimitsu's not dead either. She's just missing. And I think that's more so of him trying to not turn any potential fans away. I mean, that's just a marketing thing. Like, Jun was supposed to be dead. That was implied to be her head. But Harada says that because there are a lot of hardcore fans of Jun and Kunimitsu and Michelle and other characters like that. And so if he comes out and says that, yes, the character's dead, those people aren't going to invest very much in Tekken anymore, because it's like, my character's dead. Why would I? Now, of course, in fighting games, characters come back from the dead all the time. But Tekken isn't really that kind of fighting game outside of like Kazuya. Most of the time when Tekken gets ready to move on from a character, they replace that character with someone else who has the same moveset but is different. Kind of like King to King 2, Armor King to Armor King 2, that type of thing. Unless you're like Wang Junrei and you just never die at all. So, more than likely, Kunimitsu's still alive, but getting into why she's not in the game in reality, it probably has more to do with her usage numbers. In those same posts, you'll find where Harada said that her usage was extremely low in Tekken Tag 1, which was kind of outside of Tekken Tag 2, was the last major game she was in for nearly 20 years. So it makes sense. Tekken 4 was kind of a revamp. They were going with less characters overall. Tekken 3 was 20 years removed from the old ones. She wasn't used in Tekken Tag 1. There just wasn't a good place to put her back into the game. And then 5 comes along and 6 comes along. We're talking about 10, 15 years coming on to Tekken Tag 2, nearing 20 years. It's just been so long since this character has been in a game, up until Tekken Tag 2. And so it's more likely just the fact that she's an old character, she wasn't used, she was just a straight up clone, and when they took all the clone characters in Tekken 5 and made them unique, Kunimitsu got left behind because they felt like, nobody wants to use her anyway, so we'll just find someone else to put in here. So assuming Season 4 happens, does Kunimitsu come back? and what are some things in her favor and against her favor? Well, the biggest thing in her favor, I think, is the fact that they bothered to rework her for Tekken Tag 2. She was a completely new character. She's not a clone of Yoshimitsu anymore. They share maybe a couple of moves, like 3 or 4 moves. But for the most part, she is a completely new character. She's very unique. She has her own style. They completely redid her. You know, she was very generic in Tekken 1 and 2, but in Tag 2, completely revamped character all the way around. And so, yeah, that's in her favor. They've already got this brand new moveset out here for an original character that is not used in the game anywhere. She's not really like any other character other than her name anymore, but heck, we have King and Armor King. Why can't we have Yoshimitsu and Kunimitsu? Now, unfortunately, this is also the biggest draw against her, in my opinion. If you'll notice a trend in Tekken games, other than the Williams sisters, Namco does not like old women in their fighting games, alright? So bear with me here. In order to make Jin Kazama old enough to fight, there had to be about a 20-year time gap between Tekken 2 and Tekken 3 so that Jin could grow up and be at the age where he could fight without having a minor getting beat up. Even though they later went back and let minors get beat up with Kid Kazuya in Tekken 7. But I digress. Kunimitsu is old at this point. Of course, Nina and Anna were iconic Tekken characters, so to save them, they came up with this thing about how they were cryogenically frozen for the time between Tekken 2 and 3. Make no mistake, that was to keep them from getting old, because all the other women that would have become old were replaced with younger versions. So Julia Chang is the replacement for Michelle. Michelle actually shows up in Julia's Tekken 3 ending, so we know she's probably still alive, but she's older and a little bit more subdued and a little wiser, and Julia is the young, spunky counterpart takeover character, right? Even some male characters had this happen. They killed off King, said he was attacked by Ogre, so King 2 could take over after being trained by Armor King, who was not in Tekken 3, probably because they wanted to revamp and because of his age. And of course his illness in Tekken 3, in King's ending, we see that he's ill and having some health problems, and of course he's later killed by Craig Marduk. But just across the board, old women tend to not make it in the fighting game, in Tekken fighting games. Same thing, that's probably one big thing that's holding Jun Kazama back, assuming she, didn't die. Now, I know there was some stuff about her possibly reappearing in Tekken 3, like some of her data is still in the game. But again, they cut her. They didn't keep her in the game. So it looks like to me that Namco really does not want to design an old woman fighter. And somebody in the comments is going to be like, oh, but Terensu, what about Kazumi? Well, Kazumi's a bit of a weird case because she's almost like Heihachi in Tekken 5. You can play as her in Tekken 7, however, she only appears in the Tekken 7 story via flashbacks, which keeps her young. Now, could they do something like this to put Kunimitsu back in the game? I mean, you could just go the straight up ignore the story route and put Kunimitsu in the game, but all the other DLC characters have BIOS files, so it'd be kind of weird to not give her an updated story, even if it is just on a website somewhere. Or maybe there's a new story mode DLC coming, which she would feature prominently in, but I would hope in one hand and do something else in the other and see which filled up first, about Kunimitsu being the focus of a story DLC in 2020 for Tekken 7. Or maybe, somebody takes up the mask and the dagger and becomes the new Kunimitsu. Maybe they introduce an old woman character. Maybe she is worried because she's getting old, and so she's fighting in the tournament to find some Mishima secret to reclaim her youth. There are so many ways they could get around all of this and put Kunimitsu in the game. She's a great, fun character. Her new moveset is amazing. It's so fun to play her because she flips and flies and breathes fire, and she does all these great things. And she really still fits into Tekken doing all that, unlike some newer characters just kind of feel out of place with some of their gimmicks. Kunimitsu fits in very well in Tekken Tag 2, and I actually loaded up the game yesterday and tried her out again just to see if it was as fun as I remember. And it really was. I had a good time with it. So I think she would make a good addition to the cast. Here's hoping that whenever we find out what this magic forthcoming content is for Tekken 7, that old Kunimitsu is one of them. Anyway, leave in the comments below what you think Kunimitsu's reason for fighting in Tekken 7 would be. Also, leave below, what do you think happened to her? Did Yoshimitsu kill her? Did she just give up after Yoshimitsu beat her pants off? More importantly, did she really mend air conditioners between Tekken 1 and 2? I've actually tweeted this question at Harada twice, and he did not respond. So maybe we need to get a Twitter campaign going to find out if Kunimitsu really mended air conditioners. If she did, I really hope it's a customization item for her in T7 if she gets released. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate all your support, likes, subs, and feedback. Take care out there, guys.